Hello, happy December. Welcome to Conversations with a Wounded Healer. I'm your host, Sarah Bueno. I'm a psychotherapist in Chicago, and I love talking to other healing professionals about the intersectional journey of healing self while caring for others. Welcome. If this is your first time joining us, hello. I hope you enjoyed today because it's a very special episode, actually. And if you've been listening for a while, thanks so much for coming back. Before I get into the deets of today's episode, I do need to offer a retraction. I think this is the first time I've actually retracted something, but I was lovingly corrected by my cousin Carrie. So in episode 173 with Courtney Wells, I had said something about I thought I was the first person in our family to move outside of Ohio. And my cousin was like, nope, I moved to North Carolina before you had moved out of state. So I'm very sorry, Carrie. You win. You were the first in the family to leave. So today's episode is very special, not only because we are working to support an organization that does really amazing work in Chicago, but also this was a live episode. So if you follow us on social media, you may have seen us go live when we were recording this. And now this is the version of the podcast that we are sending out to you. But this is Camesha Jones. She is our amazing guest today. And I want to give a shout out to her, but also tell you very specifically about the fundraiser that she's doing. So the fall fundraiser is called Whole Women, Whole Communities. And this year, Sista Afya Community Care offered 650 free therapy sessions, free therapy, and over 35 community workshops and classes that have collectively served over 200 women. The goal this year is to raise $35,000 so they can continue to offer free mental wellness care to Black women in Chicago. They need your support to sustain the progress they've made so far, and as they continue to remove barriers to accessing mental wellness care in communities. Will you please, please, please do me a big fave and contribute to their year-end annual campaign? You can give $50, $100, $250. Truthfully, you can even give $5. Anything that you'd be willing to give them would be amazing towards their goal of $35,000. And it'll really help them deepen the impact in providing free mental wellness care for Black women. Now, we have a special link for Conversations with a Wounded Healer listeners and folks who know about head-heart therapy. So to donate to the campaign, you can visit donorbox.org/SACC Whole Women /fundraiser/Sarah with an H -Bueno. So I'll say that again, donorbox.org/SACC Whole Women /fundraiser/Sarah -Bueno. So please do contribute to that campaign if you have anything to give. Now, to share Camesha Jones with you, Camesha, LCSW, is a social worker, entrepreneur, and community mental wellness advocate who serves at the intersection of culture, community, and social justice. Camesha strongly believes in eliminating barriers in the mental health field that people of diverse cultural backgrounds experience by creating affordable and accessible care that centers the well-being of the whole person. So I hope you really enjoyed this live episode. It was so fun for us. I think we may try to do something again in the future. Who knows? At any rate, Camesha's amazing. Please enjoy this episode with Camesha Jones. OMG. Hello, Facebook. I've never done a live before, so I just feel like an idiot right now. I don't know about you. This is Camesha Jones, everyone. She's the founder, and are you president, CEO? What's your...
executive director.
Okay, so she is the founder and executive director of Sista Afya. Did I pronounce that right?
Yes, you did.
Amazing. And yeah, so we're just going to do a live podcast today.
Yes.
Yeah, so who knows what's going to happen, the madness.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, thank you for having us in your space. This was so lovely.
Yeah, welcome to the South Side. Welcome to South Shore. It's great to have people in the space to like see what we do and like what we embody. So I'm grateful that you're here.
Oh, awesome. Well, before we dig into Sista Afya itself, how about telling folks just more about who you are?
Yeah, sure. So again, my name is Camesha. I am a social worker and community mental wellness advocate and also a mental illness survivor. So I love doing this work because I know how it feels to be on the other side of the chair. But also I'm just really energized in this moment with the work around mental health, and particularly mental health in the Black community and with Black women in Chicago. So I've been doing this specific work for 5 years, but my journey in social work, in social justice, in mental health is about 10 years old. So I'm really, really fortunate to still be here, because this work, as you know, as social workers, like you can get pretty burnt out. And so I'm thankful that I'm still energized to do this work. And Sista Afya is like my baby.
Yes.
So I'm like excited, like as a business owner, to also have something that people gravitate towards and something that's like making an impact. So
yeah, that's awesome. Well, what made you want to become a social worker?
So interesting story.
Right.
Story time. When I was an undergrad at Spelman College, I majored in sociology. And so some of my professors, they were like, oh, well, you are really great with research. You're a good writer. I could see you being in academia. And I was like, I want to do something more action oriented. Like, could I be a professor? Yeah, maybe, right? But like, I want to work with people in the community. I want to work with folks on the ground and really be a part of the solution in a different kind of way. And so I started to look, I was like, okay, what can I do? I got the sociology degree. What can I do that's action oriented, that's about social change, that's about really serving the community? And that's how I found social work. And so when I found social work, I was like, oh, this is perfect. Like there's so many things that I can do within, this degree or this field. And that's where it started. Yep, that's where it started.
That's awesome. And I'm curious so you're from Baltimore, right?
I am from Waldorf, Maryland.
Wow. Okay.
Which is about an hour south of Baltimore.
Okay. So people from Baltimore would be like, don't say you're from Baltimore.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. Right. That. Just like if you're from like, I don't know, Winnetka, you're not from Chicago. Like, don't say that.
Yes.
Okay. So Shauna Marie Brown, have you heard of her?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Shauna Marie Brown is my favorite. She's a social worker out of Baltimore. Decolonizing therapy for Black folks. We took that course last year. We're having more folks take it this year. And she talks about like social justice being part of the master's tools. Like we can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. So she's like decolonization, but that's also not a verb. There's so many like different things around it because there's a fucked up history with social work, right?
Absolutely.
So I'm curious like how you reconcile for yourself. Like it sounds like you use the term social justice, even though it could be decolonization, it could be something else. But how do you reconcile being in this work, knowing that there is some problematic history?
Yeah. What's interesting about that is I really believe that within most fields, especially within the US, there's doctors and there's doctors who have done horrible things, right, to people of color. We have so many industries in fields where that happens. So for me, I recognize the parts of social work that I am not too fond of. Like, I don't like child welfare. I don't like the foster care system. I don't like child protective services. Those are things that I just like, I cringe. Like, I don't want to go near that work. I respect people who are in it, but for me, ethically, it doesn't line up for me. Yeah. So I know the things that I don't like, right? But then I also recognize this amazing history of Black women social workers. Like a lot of people don't know that social work was one of the first quote unquote professional fields that Black women could actually break into, like education. And so there are so many Black women social workers that I look up to. And so when I think about that history, that makes me excited to do the work. I think with decolonizing therapy, and there's so many terms, social justice, social equity, all those different things, but it's all about what you do, right? Because you can have some therapists who like, I decolonize therapy, and they're not living that, right? So for me, if these values that I have within the field, they are what I try to espouse in the work that I do. And so I feel like that's the work.
That's awesome. And it's such a good point. Like, is there a field that hasn't like hurt people of color? I don't know that there's not, right? Because, government systems, healthcare systems, financial systems, like, everything has hurt people of color. So you're right. Like, well, everything's fucked. So I might as well Right, reconciled that way. Goodness. Well, tell us about Sista Afya, like how that idea came. Tell us about the name, what that means to you, everything.
Yeah, so Sista Afya is a part of, I would say, like the personal is political, going back into that space that we were just in.
Yeah.
So when I was in recovery for my mental health, I would go to IOP groups, I would go to support groups, I would try to find a therapist, and none of them had the same similar cultural background as myself. And I recognized that also my friends and my peers were also experiencing the same thing. You know, a lot of people in their mid-20s are experiencing the height of their mental health crises, you know, and we're seeing that even more now than I even think a couple years ago.
Yeah.
And I started to think, like, what would it look like if there was a community support space for Black women who have mental health conditions? So I was like, okay, I'm going to do something about it. So I had the idea in 2015 and I was like, okay, I need to finish up my graduate school work at University of Chicago. Let me get that out the way. And so I had been really, Sista Afya has been in my brain since 2015.
I love that.
But I actually made a move on it in 2017. So in 2017, I launched Sista Afya. When I originally launched it, it was just going to be about community events, community groups centered around the experiences of Black women and making mental health care accessible and affordable. But then as time went on, it evolved into individual therapy. And so now that's a huge part of our business. And then social events and then conferences. And so retreats, like it really morphed into all these different things. And really what Sista Afya does is we try to meet people at a variety of different places with their mental wellness journey. So everybody's entry point is not therapy. Sometimes someone's entry point is a support group. Yeah. Or a brunch or a conversation at a coffee shop. Like we're trying to meet Black women in a variety of different ways with what they need. And so that they have that community of support, but also are able to readily access these services. So that's kind of how Sista Afya started and then what it is now. And the name Sista Afya really encompasses the vision for the enterprise. So Sista is a word that we use within the Black community for endearment, for connection. It's a very loving word that we use amongst each other. And Afya is a Swahili word that means to be healthy, free of psychological and physical illness. So together, the name Sista Afya is for Black women to be connected to one another and to experience freedom from psychological and physical illness. So that's the name. And quick, like little side note, originally, I was like, when I was thinking of the name, I was like, first it was going to be Sister's Heart. And I was like, whoa, that sounds really bad. Like I was thinking,
Sister's Heart.
Sister's Heart. I was like, that doesn't sound good. I was like, that doesn't sound good. And so I was like, I need to find something that has a little flavor, a little edge. And then I came across the Swahili word Afya and I was like, oh, that's perfect. So
yeah. That's awesome. And the way you talk about community care, I'm just watching you get really excited. And I love that people can see. Usually I'm recording this in my closet and they can't see what you're doing, but like you're so energized by this. And so, I mean, just the passion itself is just so beautiful to watch. But what's, I think, so striking that many listeners and people who are viewing this might not recognize is a lot of that community wellness, like that has been whitewashed, right? Taken out. And I hear you really putting that cultural piece back in because it for the Black community, it is about community. It's not an individualized, system. And so that's just so wonderful that you're bringing it where people are.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that we, even in addition to our history as of African Americans, are very collectivist, community-centered culture because we were all we had, right? We all we got. But even with other communities, all of us can benefit from community mental wellness care. Like the fact that you have to go to therapy on your own, you have to process everything on your own. Figure things out. Even self-care has also been really sanitized, like you have to do all these things for yourself. And it takes away the community that you need that helps to sustain you. And to say, when I don't have the capacity, my friend may have the capacity to support me. And that accountability and that care is absolutely necessary.
Right. Yeah. Have you ever heard the name Michelle Winston? Okay,
Mm-mm.
because she went to University of Chicago. I think she was several years behind you. So she was actually, when I worked at a community mental health place called Alternatives, we worked with youth and family. She was my first intern. I love her so much. And we became friends. And she's a Black woman. And she created this company called To Indie with Love. She moved back to Indianapolis and created this space where it's all about play and community. And she's like created these groups where people pay what they can. And it's just this like, I'm hearing a very similar vibe with there's so much love that I'm hearing that you really infuse into the work that you do. And that's also something that's been whitewashed out of a lot of spaces, right? Like, I mean, a therapist that I had before, she was like, we've taken the love out of therapy. And why would we do that? That's actually part of the magic, right? Any thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And even in working with my team, I'm like, we don't got to be tight about everything, right? Like, we are Black women, and some of my staff identify as women of color, and we are serving our community, right? So I've seen my clients on the bus, I've seen them in the store, and I don't act like, oh my God, I can't say anything.
You have to tell Raelle that because that's her.
I'm like, oh my God, I can't say anything. I can't do anything. But encourage them, have conversations, right? Like, it's okay. You know, I had a client who had a recent tragedy and I didn't realize it, you know, when she was talking about it in session in the way that she was. And I texted her and I was like, I'm so sorry. My condolences, you know, to like you and your family. And that's a part of the love, right? Instead of being like, oh, that's her life, keep it separate, right? So I think that as therapists, we do need to bring like more love and intention into what we do, and to not get so professionalized or almost like manualized that we don't provide that, you know, to the people who we're serving.
And what gave you the internal permission to show up that way? Because that's not what we were taught in school, that you self-disclose only, you know, if there's a very specific reason, you know, all these things, the way that we're supposed to hold ourselves. What gave you the permission to be like, nah, I'm going to do it my own way. I'm going to do it with love.
To be honest, working in communities where that was absolutely necessary. So I worked on the west side of Chicago for about 3 years, and working with middle school age at quote unquote at risk girls. And I used to have to go into their homes. I used to have to speak to their moms and their family. I used to have to break up fights. That's something they don't tell you about.
Right. They do not teach you that.
They do not teach you that. And doing it the way that we're trained, it's not going to work. It wouldn't have worked. So it forced me to be like, okay, yes, this is what I'm talking about in school, about boundaries and all these other things. But for me to do this work effectively with this community, I have to change the way that I'm doing things. And so even when I'm meet with my clients, they're like, hey, Miss Camesha, how are you doing? You asked how I'm doing. And I'm like, and I tell them, I was like, yeah, I've had an interesting week, or I'm looking forward to this. And it doesn't feel like anything. It doesn't feel like I can't self-disclose. Like, it feels, you know, natural. And our community want to get to know us. Like, we don't want to just be that person who we're talking to and, you know, don't necessarily like have a connection with.
Yeah. Well, and when you talk about boundaries, this is how I kind of reconcile it, because and I teach in university, so I'm with, you know, MSW students getting ready to get out in the world. And so we talk about these things a lot. And I understand conceptually that we have to set boundaries in a certain way. If you do your work, if you do your inner work, and you have, you know, you've worked on your relationship with power, you've worked on your codependency, you've worked on all of these things, then you have an awareness where you can play with boundaries a little bit differently, right? Yeah. I mean, so it all goes back to the inner work, but they're also not talking about that in school, are they?
No, they're not.
You got some words about that?
Yeah. I mean, I think in school, what we were told at UFC, and I have my love relationship with UFC and my critical relationship with UFC, they were like, every therapist should have a therapist. That was one of the first things that they told us. Okay. Cool, I'll have a therapist, but what is the inner work that I need to do to bring myself to this work and to do what I'm ethically supposed to do, but also what our profession is supposed to do.
Right.
So in school, it's just like, oh, you get this thing, or almost like self-care. Oh, you focus on self-care, but what are the inner things that you need to work through? And how can you authentically still do this work, but be yourself?
Right. Yeah. I mean, do you mind sharing some of the inner work that you've had to do? Because you mentioned that you went through an IOP program, you were, in recovery with your mental health. What sorts of things did you walk through?
For me, it got to a point like before I was in recovery and it got really, really bad. And I had to make the decision for myself, is this what you want your life to look like moving forward?
Like what? Were you depressed or what was the...
So depression, so I have bipolar disorder.
Got it.
So it was, do you want your life to look like this?
Yeah.
Do you want this to be your story? Do you want this to be the end of your story? And when I got to that point, that's when I was like, I'm doing all the things that I need to do for myself. And I've been in therapy for, I would say consistently, like the past 6 years. And I'm in a place where like, I feel like normal Camesha.
Yeah.
I don't feel like it's this thing that's hovering over me, that's taking over my life. I go to therapy. I go to my internal medicine doctor. I go to my psychiatrist. I take my meds. I try to keep my stress low. I do all the things. And I don't feel like it's something that has control over me. And that's part of why I call myself a mental illness survivor. Because when people, like, especially with my mental health condition, is very highly stigmatized. And people don't think that someone like me and the way that I function is possible. They think that that's not possible. But there are people all over the place, who have, what would be considered more severe mental health conditions that are fine, right? We're still moving and shaking. Our work look different. Everybody's work is different. So this is my particular work, but somebody else, it might be childhood trauma. That might be their work, right? Or
I think we've all got childhood trauma.
Yes. Or family dynamics. That might be their work.
Right.
But my work was just different. And I put a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of investment, but it's worth it. Like I wouldn't be where I am today without it.
Right. Yeah. I feel the same way. Like owning my business almost killed me. Like I was suicidal. I went through treatment last summer. Actually, I went to a trauma treatment program because it was just taking me down. Right. And if I wasn't committed to that inner work, I would be dead. Like truthfully, I don't know if you ever struggled with suicidal ideation, but just because we're therapists, that doesn't mean we can bypass these things, I mean, this is why we became therapists, most likely, is because we didn't bypass them. And we know how important it is to have those people who are able to help.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And sometimes people do see us as people who have it all together. And I'm like, ooh, if you all knew how many of us are, either we're dealing with some of the same things. Yeah. We're all dealing with some of the same things. It doesn't mean that we can't be effective in this work because we may be dealing with trauma or suicidal ideation or any of those things. But it's the commitment, like you're saying, to doing the work and healing.
Yeah. And sometimes I think about, because two people from the same family can have very different levels of resiliency and different commitment to the work. And I don't know what the answer is for like why some people actually get the help and why others don't.
Yeah, that's something that I think about quite often.
Yeah.
When we have people fill out like our client registration form, we ask them, how long have you been dealing with your mental health condition? Most of them say over 5 years. And the average is, I think, 5 to 10 without any intervention.
Right.
And there's a resiliency in that, like, wow, you survived all these things and you made it this far. But then there's the other side of how different your life could maybe look like if you sought the help.
Right.
And if you did it sooner. Like for me, I know that when I started to feel the really deep depressive symptoms, when I was having changes with my sleep, with my stress, if I would have got help maybe a year to 2 years sooner than when I had my crises, my life would have looked different, in some way or another. It would have looked different. I think that some people are resilient, right? And they're some of us are forced to be resilient because of, the lack of infrastructure or resources or accessibility.
Yeah.
But then there are a group of us who can benefit even with being resilient and stepping out and getting care.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, something else that I've talked about in especially social justice, liberation, decolonization circles is this idea that post-traumatic growth, and I literally think everybody's gone through trauma, right? It's all in a spectrum, so whether it's, recovering from mental illness itself is trauma. So post-traumatic growth means that it's after, but people of color are traumatized on a daily basis, right? So one of the things that a friend of mine, Cassie Walker, has talked about, post-traumatic growth as a privilege for people whose trauma ends. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that, when there are plenty of people who, whether it's being a person of color, gay or trans, or not having enough financial means, the trauma doesn't end for them.
Yeah. And I know Cassie. Me and Cassie are
friends. Oh, cool.
See, the world is so small.
It's so small. That's right. Don't piss people off,
right?
Because it's very small.
Yes. So I agree that for some of us, it's continuous. I'm also a very hopeful person. Even though trauma is happening doesn't mean that I can't have a full life. And that's a different perspective.
Yeah.
I think about my grandparents. My grandmother grew up in DC when it was segregated. And then I think about my grandfather. He grew up in Southern Illinois, and he was the only Black person in his high school.
Wow.
And I think about how full their lives were during a very difficult time in American history, during segregation, during Jim Crow, during all these different things. And they still had beautiful children. They were involved in their communities. They mentored people. They were teachers. They had a full life despite of.
Yeah.
And so even though I recognize that, yes, as a Black person, there's a lot of trauma going on all the same time. But that doesn't mean that the other thing can't happen. And I do think sometimes the conversation is just because you have this constant trauma, the other thing can't happen at the same time, concurrently. But I believe it can.
Yeah. I'm curious, and if you don't want to go here, that's totally fine. But we often get very spiritual and woo-woo on here. What are your spiritual beliefs?
Yeah, sure. I'm a Christian.
Okay.
So I grew up in the Black church. Church was a very important part of not just my moral compass, but my development as a person. So I was on the usher board, I sung in the choir, I did dance ministry. And that was my first entry into the beautiful community that Black people create, right? And just serving, having a heart to serve other people, that also came from my upbringing in the church. And I know Christianity, there's a lot of different opinions about Christianity. Sometimes Christianity can be looked at as this evil, oppressive thing to some people, right?
Well, a lot of people use it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But my personal relationship with God saved me when I was in the deepest depths of, mental health crises. The only thing that I believe really pulled me out, in addition to community support, was my faith in God. That was what pulled me out. And so I know faith means different things for different people, but my spiritual beliefs, my relationship with God is one of the driving forces in my life,
And I asked because that hopefulness that I don't know, there was just a light in you that I was there's some higher power stuff going on here that I could kind of see. And I teach an addictions course, and one of the things that we talk about, of course, is 12-step. And the students are always like, oh, 12-step, it's religious. I'm like, it's not religious. It's spiritual. That's two different things. And the research says that people who get into recovery, if they have some sort of spiritual belief or religious belief, they do better in recovery. And I don't know what the statistics are on that for mental health, but I would guess that it's exactly the same.
Yeah, I definitely think it's an added layer of grounding and an added layer of support.
Yeah.
And it provides hope as well. Yesterday, I went to a nonprofit organization and spoke to some women in Inglewood. And these were women who were taking care of their grandchildren. So these were like, I would say maybe middle-aged to elderly Black women. And they were going through some stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But they said, you know what? I know God has a plan for me. I know that this is going to work out. Like, this is temporary. I pray every day despite of.
Yeah.
And even though they were going through all those things, that spiritual anchor like provided them with that extra support. And that's what I think of. It's like an added bonus. It's like an added bonus. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, we could get into this, but this would be a whole different podcast, just thinking about, you know, how do we make, if you're somebody who believes in God, how do we make sense of all the bad things that happen? But I'm with you that I think there is, I don't know, when you say like there's a reason for what happens, I think people can get really like, don't tell me there's a reason when I'm in the middle of my trauma. So I think there's times not to say there's a reason for everything, but I don't know. I like the idea that there is something bigger that gives a shit about me, not only gives a shit, but really truly has unconditional love and cares. And I think for me, this is personally for me, and I'd be curious what you say. I know that some of the obstacles that have been put in my path are specifically to get me ready for greatness later. Like, I've had so much like business bullshit happen over the last several years and bad partnerships. It got me ready to be an integrated leader, somebody who knows what it means to not have power and to be responsible then with power. So I don't know. That's what I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes you tough. I tell you that. Having the obstacles makes you tough. It brings out the best in you in some regards. And that's not for everybody.
Right.
But me making it through my challenges with my mental health to the point that I would say like a growing business owner, you know, growing stable business owner for 5 years, like that gave me the tenacity to be like, okay, this happened. Okay, I done been through something worse.
Yeah.
Okay, I can, I can manage this. So yeah, it definitely like the trials, the obstacles, and the spiritual grounding, at least for me, helps me to believe that I can overcome these different things that may come my way.
Yeah. Yeah. So are you a healer?
Am I a healer? I think so.
I love that. I don't know why that's my preferred answer to the question. Like, no offense for people who say no, but I love that. Yeah. Tell me more.
Yeah. When we were talking a little bit earlier and we were talking about groups versus individual therapy, and I think one of the gifts of me as a healer is bringing people together to heal. I think that's my jam.
Yeah.
Like, I can do individual therapy and I do enjoy it, enjoy aspects of it. But I think what my natural healing is to bring people together to heal collectively. So I think that that's the way in which like I heal. I think that's like the prominent
Yeah.
thing.
I mean, community and connection really is a theme of our conversation today, right? Like every single thing we've talked about, that's the thread I'm really weaving through this, which is so cool. In a time, especially where, I mean, man, we have needed each other. And a lot of people have rejected the fact that we need each other by not getting vaccinated and blah, 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 blah. But whatever. Sorry, I digress. Well, how do you feel about the term wounded healer?
Wounded healer. When I hear wounded healer, I think about humanity. Like it brings a humanity. Because when we think about healers, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, but people will put you on this pedestal and be like, oh, you are this healer, this expert, this guru, this person. But I think when you say wounded, it brings you back to a place where it's like, oh, and they experience things too.
Right.
When I hear wounded healer, that's what I think about. I don't want to say humbling is not the word that I want to use, but something like in that same space, as far as like it really provides like that humanity to being a healer, and that you don't have all the answers or have it all together, but you've also been through your stuff too.
Right. Is it humility?
Yeah, I think that's the better word, humility.
Yeah. And I don't even know. I mean, humility comes from humble, doesn't it? I don't fucking know.
They're in the same family.
But yeah, I mean, I grew up Christian as well. And my mom would tell you that Jesus was her best friend. Sorry for everyone else who thinks Jesus is. He was clearly my mom's best friend. She had the lock on that. But so I have a reaction to the word humble because, humble yourself before God, only, rich man What is the one like through the eye of the needle? I can't remember that scripture. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know.
You don't? You don't? We played Bible trivia every Friday night for I don't know how many years. So there's something about like, it's easier for a rich man to go through the eye of a needle than it is for them to get into heaven. I don't know why I bring that.
Oh, yeah.
But essentially, like when I hear the word humble, I think of like that more toxic sort of view of like you have to like prostrate yourself before God. I don't think my God wants me to like beat myself up. I think my God is like, you go, girl. You're fantastic. Keep up the good work. Now that was fucked up. Don't do that again, but I still love you. You know? My God is a little more flexible than the God I grew up with.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I think it's almost like a yin and yang type of thing. Like there's a way to be empowered, but there's also a way to have humility. Like I feel like it's like a balance more than anything else.
I like to have humility instead of be humble. Because be humble is a directive and have humility is like, it's just a different energy with it, which I like.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm into the like energy of words. There's always, I don't know. Anyway, let's talk about your fundraiser. Yes.
So Sista Afya, we have two parts. We have Sista Afya Community Mental Wellness, which was founded in 2017. And then in 2020, we founded Sista Afya Community Care, which is the nonprofit. And through Sista Afya Community Care, we provide free mental wellness care to people in Chicago, but we specifically center Black women. And even though we've been in existence like a little over a year, we've done, I think, some really great work. And so the Whole Women, Whole Communities campaign focuses on continuing that work. So this past year, you know, we've been in the pandemic. I can't believe it's about to be 2 years.
Jeez, right?
Whew, that's a...
I know. We can take a pause with that. I mean, honestly, right? Like there's been so much pain and so much loss and so much trauma and tragedy.
Yes, absolutely. And mental health providers have been in the thick of it. We have been in the thick of it. We've been supporting people. And throughout this pandemic, Sista Afya Community Care has been providing free therapy sessions.
So badass.
Yes. Shout out to our supporters and our funders. But yeah, we've been providing free therapy sessions. And one of the things that we found in our work, one, we didn't realize the lack of availability for free therapy. When we were doing this, we were like, oh, definitely there's other places out there. But in doing this work, I was like, wow, like we're literally one of the few in Chicago on the South Side that provides free therapy. So that's a part of what we've done this past year. We've provided 650 free therapy sessions, which is amazing. And shout out to my team, Candice and Tiana, for just really doing that work. And then we've also connected with women, just like what we've been talking about, the community aspect. So we've hosted over 25 wellness classes, groups, and workshops for women at no cost to them. And so when you support Sista Afya Community Care, you're not just supporting us to do this work. You're literally supporting women in Chicago. And one of the things that people don't know is, particularly with the therapy program, a lot of them say, this is my only option. I've gone other places. I've hit all these barriers. This is it for me.
Right.
And so Sista Afya we really serve women who have, in some regards, run out of options, right? And they need healing and they need support. And then we also, with that, women are empowered. They're like, I want therapy. Sometimes people keep saying this BS that Black people don't want to engage in therapy. Like, oh, it's more stigmatized. I'm like, no, what I see, people are coming to us. You know, people are reaching out about therapy more than they've ever have before in our community. And so for us to serve those people, we need support. So you can go to sistaafya.com/support-us, and you can give to our Whole Women, Whole Communities campaign. And our goal is to raise $35,000 by the end of this year. Any amount that you give, we graciously appreciate. But your donation helps to make Whole Women and helps to make our community stronger.
Yeah, yeah. And we are Head Heart Therapy, Conversations with the Wounded Healer. We are in such support of Sista Afya and Camesha and all the work that she's doing. So we're going to make sure to push this out for you. And yeah, we're going to surpass 35. Like we're going to blow this out of the water.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, yeah. And I was just thinking as you were talking, if you're on Medicaid, you can get free therapy, sure, but not a lot of places have good free therapy.
Very
And so,
true.
right. So for you to be offering and in a space that looks like this, right? Her space is gorgeous. You see the beautiful pink wall and the art here. Like there are a bunch of different beautifully colored walls. The offices are so warm and inviting and wonderful, as opposed to, no offense, community mental health, but a lot of them are
Drab looking. They look pretty sad.
Yeah, like they just pulled things out of, the Salvation Army and like, oh, great, this couch looks good from 1975. And no offense. I mean, truthfully, like all of these things need more support, right? The fact that you are one of the few places that provides free therapy is bullshit.
Yep.
Right? Like there does need to be more access to that. And, I can tell you too, as a small business owner of private practice, we've tried to figure out how we can be more of help, but I can't keep my head above water if I'm just giving away free therapy. So it's like, it's hard. It is hard to do what you've done. And it's fucking awesome. And I'm just so excited for you. And I'm so excited that we've gotten to connect and get to know each other. And I mean, anything our people can do to help you. I told you, you got my back. I mean, I've got your back with all my people.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I really do, because this work it's a beautiful experience, but like you said, it's also challenging. And as of recently, more people are starting to invest in mental health care just from, a governmental foundation, background. But before I started Sisafia Community Care, I was hesitant because I was like, where am I going to get funding from? Like, are people going to fund mental health care for Black women?
Right.
Like, is that going to happen? And we've been fortunate to get support, really strong support over the last year, but we need more, right? Because like I said, there aren't many organizations doing this work.
Yeah.
So support Sista Afya. Go to our website, donate. And I appreciate you all for being partners in supporting us. It really means a lot.
Yeah. Awesome. Was there anything that we didn't talk about that you really want to make sure that our listeners and our viewers, well, our viewers are gone, but our listeners get to hear?
Things are changing for the better in mental health care. Like, I think this is a very special time in our field as like healers and just working in mental health. I think that we're about to be on the horizon of something transformative for our society. I just see it and I feel it. And I want people to be excited about it. Like, even though we're in a really difficult time right now, like I see so many like possibilities of how far we can go so that people can get the healing that they need.
Awesome. When's your birthday?
October 1st.
So you're a Libra.
Yes.
Oh, that's lovely. Okay. All right. There's the optimism, the Venus love, all of it. Amazing. Wonderful. Well, I really appreciate this. And this was like a guinea pig experiment of doing this live. And this was so fun.
Yeah.
And we have Edwin behind the scenes, who always is part of the production team for the podcast, but he's actually here with us today making this magic. So thank you so much, Edwin.
Thank you, Edwin.
Thank you to Andrea and the Creative Imposter Studios. And I'll probably do a regular outro later. But yeah, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks so much to Camesha for being an amazing guest today. I'm really curious how y'all feel about the live podcast recording, so make sure to send me some feedback. You can reach out. Instagram is my favorite place to get info from other folks, so at Head Heart Therapy at Instagram. Please shoot me a message and let me know what you thought of the live episode. And thanks as always to Creative Imposter Studios for editing. A special shout out to Edwin Ruiz, who facilitated everything that had to do with the live event. Thanks to Andrea Klunder and everyone else at the Creative Imposter Studios, Ben Mueller for our theme music, and Liam O'Donnell for our album art. Thanks again. Till next time. Bye-bye.